Welcome to a video by Neo Not Designs. There's two types of brushes you can purchase. Either a gravity feed brush or a siphon feed brush. Now they have two different types of each brush. You can have what's called a single action gravity feed or a double action gravity feed, and the same with the siphon. You can have a single action or double action siphon feed. Now what that means on your trigger, a single action, you can simply depress the trigger. What this does is apply air pressure to the brush and makes the paint start drawing up through the body of the brush and spray out onto the body or media that you're painting. On the single action, the only thing you can do is press the trigger up and down for airflow. The way you adjust your paint flow is by moving the needle in the brush in or out to increase or decrease your paint flow. On a dual action brush, not only can you depress the trigger, but you can also pull the trigger back and forth. On the dual action brush, by depressing the trigger, you apply air, and as you pull the trigger back, it increases the paint flow through the brush. Pretty simple. With the siphon brush, you can make fairly quick changes. If I spray the white through the brush here, and I want to change, we'll say, to the orange, all I have to do is remove this paint jar from the brush, attach a second jar, which I keep nothing but cleaner in, spray the cleaner through the brush until I notice that the spray coming out is clear. I can then take the lid off of this white jar, run a pipe cleaner down through the draw tube to make sure I get all the white paint removed, unscrew this cap, screw it onto the orange, and then plug the orange right back into the brush, and I'm ready to go. Now we can make this paint change even easier. You can buy these draw tube tops for just about any kind of jar. So the more draw tubes you have, the quicker you can change colors. The way I have my system set up right now, I have white and black ready to go at all times. I have a cleaner ready to go at all times. Then I have a fourth jar which I can use to mix whatever color I want. So I can do four color changes fairly simply. That's one of the biggest advantages to a siphon brush. Another advantage to a siphon brush is the paint cup is at the bottom of the brush. Due to the paint cup being at the bottom of the brush, when you're trying to paint up close to something, you usually want to look down the top of your brush. If you have a gravity feed brush, you're going to have a paint cup that's sitting up here on the top of the brush right in front of your trigger. So at times, you'll get the brush into locations where you have to look through the color cup, and it makes it pretty hard to see. Siphon brushes can do detail work too. Don't be told that you have to have a gravity feed brush to do detail. You do not. This is a smaller, I believe it is a 20cc paint cup that goes on to the bottom of the brush. The nice thing about it, I can turn it sideways, put it back here. Obviously can't turn it upside down, but by having the paint cup on the bottom of the brush, it allows me to get the item it allows me to get the airbrush a lot closer to the body I'm painting. And in turn, the only thing I have to look over or around is my finger and the trigger. This makes it a lot better, because when you get right up on your work, you want to be able to see what you're doing and not have to try to manipulate the brush or yourself so you can see what you're doing. Now there are some disadvantages to a siphon brush as well. A siphon brush works by passing air through the valve. When you press the trigger, the air passes through the body of the brush, passes over the top of the needle and nozzle assembly in the front of the brush. This creates a vacuum which draws paint. This creates a vacuum which draws paint up through the draw tube and into the body of the brush. this mixes internally and then comes out the nozzle. The downside to having an internal mixed siphon brush is that the pressure must be higher to spray the same paint that you could spray in a gravity brush at a lower pressure. The downside of this, if we had this orange and we put this orange in here, it may take 20 psi, 35 psi, maybe even 45 psi to get the paint to flow and flow decently. With this same orange paint, I could take it and I could put it in a gravity feed brush, and you can easily drop 10 to 15 psi. So if it took 30 psi, we'll say, for this brush to spray the orange paint properly, if I put it in a gravity feed brush, I could spray it as little as 15 psi. Here we have a gravity feed brush. Now, most of your gravity feed brushes are going to look pretty much the same. This one has a few of the extra bells and whistles on it. They're not needed to do too much of the work that we do in RC body painting, but they do come in handy at times. The main advantage to a gravity feed brush is the paint cup is on top of the body of the brush. This allows us to put paint into the cup. We get our paint in the cup, and then once it's held vertically, gravity will pull the paint down into the brush. Unlike a siphon brush, air pressure is not required to get the paint to flow. If the paint is actually thin enough, it can run out the end of the brush just simply by pulling back the needle. Just like the siphon brush, air comes through the valve, through the body of the brush. When the trigger is depressed, it mixes internally here and comes out onto our body. The biggest advantage to a gravity brush is a lower pressure. Due to gravity pushing down on the paint and helping force it through the brush, it allows us to run at a much lower PSI than we would with a siphon brush. In turn, you can get closer to your work. You have less overspray. I personally think that a gravity brush is a little bit quicker and easier to clean than a siphon brush. A lot of people will argue that you can make a color change quicker with a siphon brush than you can a gravity feed brush. I tend to disagree with them. Again, this is a dual action brush. You can depress the trigger for air. That's the first action. Then you can move the trigger back and forth for paint flow. That's your second action. Some of the added features on this brush include a trigger stop, so your trigger can only move so far back. This limits the width of your paint stream. By turning it out, we can now get a much wider paint stream than we had previously. It also has an open back for quick adjustments of the needle. And another nice feature on this brush is the MAC valve on the front. This allows you to actually adjust the amount of airflow through the brush, so you can change to different types of paints. You can change from doing standard coverage to fine detail without having to adjust a regulator. You just make the adjustment here. One of the biggest problems with the gravity feed brush is the paint cup on top of the brush itself. The gravity cup, while it helps reduce the PSI, can also be a visual hindrance when you're trying to get up close and actually spray some shadows or do some detail work. You're going to be trying to look down the top of your brush, and you're going to have the paint cup right in the way. That's one of the biggest disadvantages. Probably the second biggest disadvantage to a gravity feed brush is the size of the paint cup itself. This paint cup is approximately a ½ ounce. This paint cup is a full ounce. In turn, a gravity brush, while it can be used as a mass coverage brush, you're going to have to add a lot more paint to your paint cup. You're gonna have to refill it more often than you would a siphon brush. Brush has a fixed paint cup. There are brushes out there that have adjustable size paint cups. Here's one of those brushes that has an adjustable size paint cup. You'll notice right now I have approximately, I think that is the 1/4 ounce paint cup on there. All I have to do to replace my paint cup is unscrew the lid, or unscrew the paint cup and screw on the next paint cup. Now I have a more standard 1/2 ounce on there. But if I wanted even more time for painting, be able to hold more paint, and go to a larger paint cup yet. And as you can see, as the paint cup gets larger, you can only imagine what it's going to be like trying to shoot down the top of that and look through those things. Gets to be a pain in the butt at times. That's why this airbrush has a small cup. It's one of my detail brushes. With the smaller cup, doing detail, you usually don't require a large volume of paint. Therefore, you can use a fairly small cup. I can get it much closer to what I'm working on, and actually not have to look over or around the paint cup, because it's basically the same height as my finger.